I would like to start again by thanking the Rockford University, the philanthropy and alumni engagement, and everyone who joins us today. Thank you for supporting the series. Brown Bag series are organized by Professor Marilyn Loyola and myself, Orhan. Today's speaker is Professor Kyle Stedman, and he will be leading our second workshop on reflective writing. Let me introduce you, Kyle, once again, even though this is the second time.
Go for it.
Professor Kyle Stedman is Associate Professor of English at Rockford University, where he serves as Writing across the Curriculum Director, Writing Center Director, and Interim Chair of English Department. He teaches courses in first-year composition, professional writing, creative nonfiction, and composing with sound, among others. When he's finished with his 3 ongoing scholarly projects, he's eager to start writing the story of his historic home. So welcome everybody, and then please join me in welcoming Professor Stedman. Kyle, go ahead, please. The stage is yours. Virtual stage is yours.
The virtual stage is mine. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's funny how no matter how many times you do this, you still get a little bit nervous. So if you hear a funny noise, I have my fidget spinner here as something to play with in my hand, just off camera. I'm going to put into the chat one more time a link to what you're seeing on the screen. This is just a Google Doc. It's nothing more than that. It's a Google Doc that anyone has access to look at or type comments in. So if there's a point where you have a question, if there's a point where you say, wait, that's weird, you are allowed and encouraged to go in and add comments now or forever. I'll put a link to this eventually on the Teaching Writing portal page, so you can get to these links later. I do this in a doc instead of a presentation, especially for that long-term access, so that for a long time in the future, if you're like, I need more ideas about teaching reflective writing, didn't Kyle do a thing a couple of years ago? Hopefully you'll find this and then be able to click some links and see some ideas. That's why I'm doing it that way. I want to start with just a brief conversation before we even get into anything else. And I'm calling this kind of the question that keeps me up at night, inspired by some of the reading that I was doing to prepare for this. And it's this question: can our students identify what they've learned in our classes? Maybe at the very end of the semester, or maybe a month later, maybe a year later, I don't know. And can they tap into that learning in their future context? Can they think of ways to apply what they learned in your class and my class and our classes in future contexts? I don't know if I have a good answer to that. Can I just ask you really quick? What would you say in your own class, in your own context?
Like students have tidbits of things that they remember, but that often come up in different contexts, in a subsequent semester.
Yeah.
I had a student who was preparing a proposal for this undergraduate conference, and she texted me and said, by the way, I just wanted to let you know that I'm preparing a proposal for, with another professor, but I'm using the textbook that we used in this particular chapter and the things that we learned in that semester a year ago.
Yeah. I've seen that too.
It's gratifying to know that because you don't know otherwise it's happening.
This is why it's a question that keeps me up at night, because sometimes it's like it must be happening, but I'm not sure how and I'm not sure how much. Can I hear one or two more thoughts on that?
Yeah, I feel like some of that are your student learning objectives for your class, right? You tell them this is what we're going to learn in this class, and then you quiz them, test them, have them in some way demonstrate that they have, and assess that. In a number of years ago, we, in all of our classes, were encouraged to do something like, what is the learning carried forward from this class? So that, especially, I suppose in the sciences, you have to know this learning carried forward in Gen Chem before you get to organic, before you go to PChem, before so I don't know. I hope they do. It's not necessarily a question that keeps me up at night, but
yeah, I guess Kyle, we can figure that out. For me, is my kids will be going to Deb next semester, so I keep telling them every week, you're going to see this again very soon. So I guess we'll see if they take anything forward.
Yeah, we can see to some extent. We can maybe with the the new APHIS software, we'll be able to do more kind of course-to-course student learning assessment of that. I know that
some of what I've read about assessment, especially in the liberal arts and sciences, is that students only realize what they've learned actually several years after they've graduated, and then they can be quite articulate. In Professor Stedman's class, I learned how to think about putting a piece of a document together that I use this every day in my new job, and I didn't realize it then.
I would say that rings true with me. I was a very silly 18-year-old, but I still today will have little bits from college classes that come back to me. I know in some ways that feels like a weird way to start. Talk about what students have learned and how they can tap into that. I thought the title was reflective writing across the curriculum. Well, for me, this is part of the core reason. I said I want to talk about what reflective writing is, why we should do it, and how to do it. But for me, this question kind of, I guess it's more of the why, but it reminds me that reflective writing is one way to try to help students understand more to themselves. It's a way of giving students the practice of telling themselves, maybe in writing, maybe through conversation, maybe through any other kind of creative making, what it is that they've learned, and not just in the facts that they've memorized, of course, but all of the complex ways of learning that we all understand. So I do want to quickly differentiate this from my February teaching writing workshop. If you were there, that last one, I called it exploratory writing. I use the phrase writing to learn a lot. In some ways, I see that February workshop as like a big umbrella, and today's kind of one specific focused aspect of that. So a way that I was thinking of it, I was kind of going back through those notes. One suggestion I made in that February workshop was that, hey, one way to do exploratory writing is say a discussion isn't going very well. Sometimes you might just want to say, hey, everyone, let's just like pause the class and write down what you think is going on, or what the most important thing is that you've heard so far. Like do some writing to learn, writing to express to themselves, what is it that we're doing right now? You could probably call that reflective writing. I don't know. But when I'm talking about reflective writing, I'm more saying the kind of example like when you submit an essay, and along with that essay, you add some metacognition, some meta writing, some writing about the writing, some writing where you say, all right, here's what I did and why I did and what I think I got out of that, and maybe even what I didn't do very well. So again, very, very similar to topic of last time, not completely different, so much overlap. I don't really care about the terminology that much, but just if you're thinking, how did he focus that one versus how are you focusing this one? Both I really believe, and I think evidence shows are useful across the curriculum, not just in a writing class. Both are types of writing that no matter what your students are doing, you can use writing to help them write to learn, help them reflect on what they're learning. And of course, I have this big warning here. I'm going to talk like the expert. I'm really not that much of an expert. There are people in the field of writing studies who have dedicated their careers to studying reflection. It really is a growing subfield of the field. And I'm really just kind of dipping into that scholarship and acting like I know more than I do. So I think we all have our own ways of doing this. So I hope this will be, there will be a part for more conversation later. I want to lean on what you've all learned too. So if we go from that into the next big section of what this is, and of course I want to give more examples in case you're still like, what does he even mean by reflective writing? The term metacognition is one I used earlier. I'm using that pretty much equivalently, I don't know. I'm using it pretty similar to the word reflection. I'm thinking of any time where a student is stepping larger. That meta word is great, right? Stepping outside of what they're doing and thinking about it, looking at it. There's this great definition, which I'm copying. I guess I should have put that in like quotation marks. Let's just do it now, right? From this book from 2010 with this whole cycle of metacognitive processes. That's where this picture comes from. And I know it's long, but if you can read that for a second and get a sense of the whole big picture of what I'm talking about here. While I take a drink. I know this kind of cycle can feel kind of vague when it's not attached to a curriculum, when it's not attached to a rhetorical context. And yet I think all of us in our own way, we want our students to do this kind of learning, not just a learning where they memorize something and put it down for the test and then walk away, but learning where the whole time they're learning, the whole time they're through an inquiry-based model trying to learn what it is they're trying to teach themselves as well as what they're learning from you. They're always pausing and asking themselves, what am I doing? Why am I making this choice? Why did I make that plan in a way that fits this context? What kind of strategy is going to be best to solve the problem that this professor has given me? Because of course, this is the kind of thing they'll need to do, not just in class situations, but beyond that. So when I'm talking about metacognition reflection, I'm really referring in some ways to this entire process. I know reflect only comes up in that last word, but I kind of think of all of this as pretty reflective-y stuff. By the way, this link is to an entire book that the whole PDF is available online. I have not read it, but I kind of have it on my, maybe one day, maybe this summer I'll read it. It's How Learning Works. That's where that comes from. If you're still like, what are you talking about? I guess if you force me to have a more specific definition of what I mean, I would say reflection is inward and outward ways that learners make their learning and their learning processes explicit, especially to themselves, but of course, if it's in writing, to us, to someone else as well. And if you're still like, this is so general, Kyle, what do you mean? Okay, in practice, I especially mean the kind of thing I mentioned earlier, a reflective letter or an essay submitted along with something else, maybe along with an assignment, maybe in some kind of big portfolio, collecting multiple assignments at the end of a course, at the end of a sequence of courses. Reflection doesn't have to happen at the end of things. Reflection can happen along the way in journals or in process notes and any kind of like a, let me think about what I'm doing as I'm doing it sort of thing. Reflection doesn't have to be in writing. It could be ways that students are explaining out loud or in some other kind of multimodal context what they're doing. And this is when I added on to the last minute. I've started in one of my classes to ask for artist statements. It's in my class where students are thinking about how sound recordings and audio recordings can be rhetorical, how you can make choices to fit your audience's needs for your context. And for that, I thought, this is almost, it feels like an artistic, creative thing that they're making here, but I want them to reflect on the choices they made. Why did you add that music? Why did you mix that part of the interview and not this other part? Why did you add a sound effect there or choose not to add a sound effect? Why did you add sound there or choose for silence? And that terminology for me in that class, in that context of asking for an artist statement has been really rich and really interesting. I've probably gotten the best student reflections I have by calling it an artist statement, which to me almost felt too weird. I was like, we're doing rhetoric, right? Are we doing art? Is it, how are they going to be okay with that? I think it's all the same thing, but it's fine. I'm sure in your own classes, in your own context, you have ways that you could imagine adding to this sort of list. And in a minute, I'm going to ask you, I will ask you, what sort of reflective activities have you given or might you give? So that's coming. But okay, that's like the how box. That's my blue how box. So let's get into the why, which we could say is maybe a really brief little literature review. I've been prepping for this by reading this 2016 edited collection from Writing Studies, Rhetoric of Reflection. It describes 3 waves of reflection scholarship, saying that we're entering into, or 5 years ago, we were entering into a 3rd wave. So whenever you see a 2016, I'm probably pulling from one of those things. Again, I'm giving you links here so that if you want to get back and dig deeper into any of this, you can. But let me just do a super fast. I know this is the most boring part of any of this. One of the things that I would say I took most from this, especially from these first 2 links, is this idea that we don't just ask our students to reflect because it sounds like a cool idea. We do it because the more that researchers study how reflection is affecting learning, evidence seems to suggest it really does help. The more students think about what they've learned, there's evidence. Again, I'm not going to go into describing these studies. Again, I'm not an expert on all of them. That suggests that students do succeed better in classes. We all know the NISI. We've seen that word come up plenty of times here, which does correlate with retention and graduation in actual provable sort of ways. They have reflective and integrative learning as one of their like 10 big things that they're asking students to reflect on, to self-report on. There's all kinds of various ways that researchers are trying to decide what kinds of reflection work, how should we do this best in different contexts. One study from that collection talks about the importance of ongoing reflection, how that's really what helps them identify what they've learned and use it in the future. That's really where I got that phrase from that opening question. And I wanted to especially pause on this last one. In writing studies, we think a lot about transfer. And by transfer, I mean this idea of when you learn some writing skill in one class, how can we try to make it so that what you learned there will apply somewhere else? If I teach students various brainstorming techniques in Rhet 101, but then they go to Psych 201 and they don't use any of those brainstorming techniques, and they kind of act as if nothing they learned or practiced there has anything to do with Psych 201, how can I try to make that happen more often? Well, increasingly, the writing scholars who study transfer, that kind of transfer between contexts, focus on reflection. That if students don't pause and think about what is it that I did and learned here, because what did you learn in Rhet 101 can be a tricky question. It's like, I don't know, I wrote a lot. Yeah, but what did you get out of that? Well, I don't know, I wrote a lot through a process. Okay, wait, did that process work? Well, it did sometimes, it didn't sometimes. Well, when did it work? Didn't work? Well, let me reflect on that. The more they do that and say that to themselves, the more likely it is to stick, and the more likely it is that they'll practice and flex those same muscles somewhere else. I hope that makes sense. I'm just kind of blabbering on here, right? Yeah. Cool. Thanks for your nods. You're really nice. Under the why, we of course can also assign reflective writing for assessment. We know that in various ways that we're assessing our classes, our programs, that the more data points we have, the more useful it is. And I think that along with other data points, with grades, formal assessments of artifacts, etc., hearing how students reflect on how they've learned and what they've learned and how much they've learned can be useful. Now, you hear me being a little on the fence here, because I have been in formal rhetoric program assessment times where I've read a lot of students' kind of final portfolio reflective writing, where they're like, I learned so much in this class, I am now the best writer ever. I came into here knowing nothing, and now I'm better. And then I read their actual end of semester writing, and I'm like, whew, you did? So I get it. And yet, right? And yet there's an importance and a value in trusting students' experience. Sure, trying to find ways to get through the possibility of BS, which is natural to rise to the surface in any indifferentiated power situation, right? Where they have cause to want to suck up to us. And yet, right, if we can design assignments that figure out what are students doing, we can assess our programs better. Not just for its own sake, it also helps for all those other reasons too. But if we're thinking about why assign reflective writing at RU, well, we've been going through this process of approving our writing intensive course process here, right? Which is a gen ed requirement. Rhet 351 is currently the only course that counts for that, but we're hoping that very soon we'll get more and more proposals of other courses and other disciplines that want to let students take their courses instead of Rhet 351 for graduation. Well, what does our process say about that? Well, it does say that at least once in any writing intensive class, you're going to have to use the written communication value rubric for at least one assignment. And if you read their intro, they strongly suggest that when you use that rubric, one, you have the assignment and the context in front of you. They don't think that you can just kind of judge good writing in a vacuum. You have to kind of know the context of what the teacher was asking. And they say, get as much data as you can. If you're not sure how to judge if a student understands the context and purpose of the writing, for instance, on kind of one of the rows of that rubric, get some reflective writing from the student to also tell you, did they seem to, as far as you can tell, know what they were doing, or to what extent did they seem to kind of understand what the professor was asking? That's a strong suggestion from the AAC and U. When it gets to our actual form, what we require, we do have a requirement that all writing intensive courses have to include regular instruction on the details of the writing processes used to develop strong writing. And then there's a such as. So we're not specifically saying you have to do this and this and this and this. And yet we're like, you can't just say, here's an assignment, give me it back to me. You did writing, it's writing intensive. No, you've got to walk your students through the process. And part of that, the final one on that list of things that we strongly suggest is reflecting on writing. And then on the form itself, if it's been a while since you've looked at it, it does actually ask you to say, hey, tell us a little bit about how you're going to teach this class. And by the way, tell us how you're going to ask students to reflect. Now it's written in a way that, like, it doesn't really say exactly how the Writing Across the Curriculum board is going to judge your answer. Partly that's because this is brand new and I don't think we quite know yet, but I don't think someone would want to see that question and write, I don't even believe in reflection. I'm not even going to try it. Sounds dumb. We might say like, why don't you reflect on your answer to that and write it again? So again, it's built into our process in a way that we're trying to get more people to do this. Kristen, I didn't tell you I was going to do this, but you also wrote a great email to the WAC board once. And I love two of the points that you made. This is from a while back, but you said, without reflection, students will see their grade on a paper and move on. Poof, I got a good grade. Let's keep going. Of course, we all do that sometimes. We're all stressed sometimes, but how much cooler if we could go beyond that? And Kristen also pointed out this idea. I love this idea of values of the community, reflecting on the work you're doing. Lets the students think about, what is my context here? What community am I writing into? I'm never just writing in a vacuum. I'm always writing for someone and for some purpose. And maybe I need to think about, even if this writing is working for some context, my 10th grade English teacher, maybe I need to pause and reflect on if it's working for what I'm doing now in this class, which of course is a useful way to build our critical thinking throughout our lives. The last thing I have on the why box here is this great thing, which is maybe a little on the side, but one of the chapters from that Rhetorical Reflection book told the story about teachers reflecting on how they teach writing. And of course we do some of that here, right? We write our annual reports for our programs, our program reviews. Tenured faculty write their 5-year plans, untenured write their, every 2-year RTP documents. We actually do quite a bit of written reflection. And again, I don't think that's an accident. Some of the sorts of things we do and sometimes discover about ourselves through those processes is part of what we're trying to introduce to our students here. But there's this great chapter. You can see the paragraph where the Writing Across the Curriculum director went to every department at University of Minnesota over 10 years or something, and just asked this question here: what writing abilities should students in your majors be able to demonstrate? And she recorded them. She recorded and transcribed the discussions, and the chapter includes some of the transcripts of those. And it's fascinating to hear one person say, well, students can't analyze in our classes. And someone says, what do you mean by analyze? And they're like, what do you mean? What do I mean? But they all know what analyze means. And someone's like, yeah, analyze means this. And someone else says, no, it doesn't. Analyze means this. And a third colleague says, I tell students analyze means that. And they start looking at each other and like, do we not all agree on what good writing means? One department, it was like ecology and environmental science, I think. They actually they put together a survey. They were so fascinated by this. They put a survey of 6 or 7 things, traits of good writing. And they sent it to all their majors, all the students, and said, what do you think faculty want here? Check the top 3. And then they gave to all the faculty and said, what do you want here in good, which of these 7, what are the top 3 that faculty want in good writing in our program? And they were totally opposite. What the students thought they wanted was not at all what the faculty thought. So this is my favorite part. The faculty hired a third-party research assistant who not from their department at all. And that research assistant collected all of the writing assignments for the last few years and coded them, did really in-depth research on analyzing exactly what the teachers actually seem to be asking for, and what the teachers seem to be indicating in their written assignments aligned much more with what the students thought. So in other words, faculty had assumptions about what they wanted, but they gave assignments that sent students a different message. And students got that message, but they did not get the deeper unspoken message about what the faculty wanted. I'm not saying we necessarily need to do that. We're not University of Minnesota either. But I am fascinated by the idea. How much do we in our departments and our colleges need to or want to reflect on what we value and how we're communicating what we value? That's the new thing that's going to keep me up at night after this reading I've done. Okay, so we've talked what, we've talked why, we got to talk about how. I, of course, have ideas. I've got some ideas. If you've got this open on your own computer, you can scroll down. But no, I want to hear more of your ideas. I would love to know in your own context, and obviously I'm going to type these for all eternity here. What are some ways that you give students the chance to reflect. And let me say reflective writing, composing, I'm even going to say like making or speaking. You know, what ways do you ask students to reflect in any way? And then after we have a bit of a discussion and we save a few minutes at the end, I'll give you a couple other ideas that I found as I've done some reading. It's hard to do this well in a Zoom class, so I would love for you to just speak up. If you want to raise your digital or virtual hand, I can see all of you right now. I have like 2 monitors here, but feel free to just dive in.
One thing that we have done in our senior sem, for example, because it's a writing process, you're writing this big, is do peer review, and we ask a lot of questions. So while that's not necessarily initially reflecting on your own writing because you're reading someone else's, they're in a group where then they ask questions of the author, and then the author, while they're not writing it down, it's not reflective writing, they are explaining, this was my process, this is how I intended for you to read this. And so it's kind of reflective in that way.
A+, yeah, that counts. Yeah. I'm interested in that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'll jump in really quick. I think because so much of what we do in the performing arts is based on, especially in dance, is based on physical knowledge and what you're learning and processing physically as well as intellectually. So, reflective writing helps students process, skills and technique and what are you carrying from one level to the next level. Mm-hmm. And then we do a lot of journaling and reflecting on choreographic processes as well.
Tell me more about that, journaling on choreographic processes.
Yeah, so, the choreographic track that gets them basically to their senior sem, choreographic production, they journal about what processes did they use to choreograph, what tools work for them, what tools don't work for them, and being able to articulate that so that they can figure out what their process is, what their choreographic voice is. Very much related to, an artist statement like you were talking about.
Oh, it's fascinating. Thanks, Lauren. And remember that there's also a could here too. If you're like, man, I've got an idea, even though I've never done that before.
This is going to sound a little assessment-y, but sometimes I start, actually in the history class that I teach, the Latin American history class, I'll start the first day with a word like colonize or something like that. It's right in response to that word. And then I might give them that same word toward the end of the semester and have them then, write in response to that, let's say for 15 minutes or 10 minutes or something, and then give them both sheets, right? So that they're then seeing like, wow, 4 months ago or 3 months ago, this is what I thought this meant. And look at how much I understand of this word and the context and all that stuff now. So it's a little bit, reflection-y, but only if they can compare, like they kind of have evidence of how they have changed.
And don't you think it often works that way? Like what can, because I didn't say the kind of obvious thing that I think is in my mind a lot of times when I want to do this kind of assignment, is that it can just feel like busy work, right? That if students haven't been trained, haven't thought about it, haven't ever seen the value of reflecting on their work, it can just feel like a dumb thing my teacher's asking me to do. I really, really get that. And before I mentioned all of the kinds of reflection we do, and I said it super positively, our annual reports, our 5-year program reviews, and I didn't say the kind of elephant in the room of sometimes writing those things kind of sucks. But what can take it above that, this is what I'm getting to, is seeing that evidence, seeing something that you did, and you're like, oh, I have changed. It's right in front of my face. I can't avoid the thing I'm looking at. So reflection and response to evidence, especially evidence that the students have had their fingers on, that's really cool and it can be really powerful.
I do the same thing. It's interesting, Madeline. Have we talked about this? Because I do exactly the same thing.
No, we haven't.
for gender class, slavery, I'll do it in the fall if the empire class goes. In addition, I ask them to, in addition to writing it down and then giving it back to them, I ask them to tell the whole class in the first few sessions what those thoughts were. And I keep a comprehensive list for the class so that as we deal with whatever their perceptions were, often right on and sometimes 180 contrary to history, I refer back collectively to their first statements of assumptions. What do you think slavery was like in the ancient world? What do you think gender was in ancient Rome? So a combination of a continuous group reflection plus an individualized pre and post.
That's great. Thanks a lot. Sometimes I have personally fallen back. I'll have a bad attitude about pre and post stuff because I'll think, well, I'm not teaching students facts the way that a lot of other classes are. I don't need to do like a pre and post type thing. And clearly there are richer, fuller ways to do it. So thanks for the reminder. I would love to hear like 2 more, but I'm not going to push forever.
I can go ahead and go. One thing I often do is have students reflect on the way they seek out and gather information, including the steps they take, their feelings in that process. And then another thing that they can note before I show them a couple models, and then sort of to see where they fall within these models. And what I used to do at the end of the class then is after they had submitted these projects is we would have a conversation around that. And so it was informal and it was participatory. But one thing that you're making me reconsider now is for that to be, that there should be one more written reflection of that, right, after they've gone through the class and seen some of these things.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot. It's been a while. There was for a while, I actually thought I was going to write my dissertation about some kind of information literacy focus of writing studies. And I remember there was a research group for a while that they were asking students to research with a screencast on as they were speaking aloud and showing what they were doing. And I remember seeing some of the early results of that. And it was just so fascinating to hear students say, okay, I need this, so I'm going to go here, I'm going to do this, I'm going to try this. Oh, that's an annoying result. So let me try that. And then having that record for them to go back and look at later, kind of in the same way Marlene and Stephanie are saying, to go back and look at that artifact and reflect on, oh my goodness, that's what I did. How could I have just such a short time ago not realize the things that I know now? It's a great way to articulate. I took that a little away from you, Andy, but there's so many ways to do that with skills like research. Thanks.
I do a couple of different, in art history, a couple of different reflection essays that aren't mentioned here specifically. So a lot of times at the 300 level, I'm primarily teaching studio art majors who need the 300 level art history. And so with the research and writing assignment, I've started to allow, and more because they seem to get more out of it, for them to do less writing, but they have to make up for it by producing some other kind of a product, whether it be a couple of paintings or a sculpture or a series of TikToks or, whatever it is, like they make something. And the writing then becomes a way for them to reflect and comment upon, this is what I researched and learned, and here is how I applied it or incorporated what I researched into the painting, the series of TikToks, whatever, so that the writing is really reflection on the process and how what they researched impacted whatever the product is. And so explaining the choices that they made, there's a lot of that, like, so that seems to be working really well. Then at the 100 level, there's, this seems to be different from the kind of reflection that you're different but related from the other examples. At the 100 level, they do a reflection essay or a response essay. It gets called both, where they are reflecting on, like, I picked this work of art. I had this initial response to it. And now I'm going to tell you why I had that initial response. I'm going to reflect on what is it that I see there that produces this response in me, so that it becomes about analyzing, like taking the visual experience and reflecting on that in words.
It's really cool. And we know that the more ways we can use different parts of our brain, right, to engage our creative sides and our analytical sides on the same topic, the deeper it's going to become a part of us. That's really cool.
Yeah. So those are kind of two ends of 100 level, mostly for non-majors, 300 level for majors, kind of how things have been working out well in recent semesters.
That's cool. I wasn't going to add anything here, but I actually want to bounce off of when you said explaining the choices they made. In my, when I was teaching a Ret 351 on professional communication, professional writing, I wanted students to do a lot of things that weren't, traditional academic essays. I wanted them to make resumes and make LinkedIn accounts and write cover letters and design flyers even. Sometimes it got very visual, write reports. And towards the end of the semester, they could even choose a kind of a multimodal type of thing to do. If they chose with their groups, they could make videos. They could do a lot of things. And the unifying thing there was I asked them to write what I called a memo of goals and choices. And I stole that phrase from a scholar in my field who talks about statement of goals and choices quite a lot. Her name's Jody Shipka. She wrote a really great book about all of the creative, awesome things we could ask our students to do with all sorts of communicative materials, really, things that definitely verge more towards what we might call art. And she says, this still counts as rhetoric. This still counts as powerful communication, especially when they're doing that, when they're saying, let me tell you the goals I had in mind and the choices I made to achieve those goals for that context.
Yeah. In the 300 level assignment too, I'm thinking it's really good practice for the artist statement that they have to write to go with their senior show. I mean, that is truly reflecting on, here is what this body of work is about, and here are the choices. They don't state it specifically, the choices I made, but they're telling their audience, this is what this body of work is about. And that's them reflecting on process and product.
I have a friend who's a visual artist. He does a lot of math, computer algorithm stuff. And I remember when he was just starting to actually get into galleries, he was surprised how much he had to really be good at writing an artist statement. And this is not my field at all. And this is years ago. But I remember him saying he wanted to be like, it's just art. Let it speak to you. It's really powerful. I wanted to evoke emotion. Yeah. And they were like, that's not good enough. He's like,
it's a perpetual battle with the studio art majors. So if you could just tell everyone you come across what you just said, that would be helpful. In my department, they are not, they are by nature visual communicators. They are not by nature text-based communicators. And there can be some resistance and difficulty in getting them to put image into word. It's not their favorite activity.
No, that's really, really thoughtful. Well, let me move on and show you a couple ideas. Obviously, this conversation can continue forever. If you're like, let's keep talking about ways from my class, I can talk more. Any of us can. We can have a reflection party. Once we all get vaccines, we're going to be hanging out at Prairie Street all day, right? So let's, I've got some ideas. I was reading around trying to find stuff. There's a lot of them here. I hate to just read at you. Sorry for my long, boring document. A lot of times, the obvious way we think of reflective writing is part of a portfolio, part of a big final thing. I mentioned earlier that can happen at the end of a class. It can happen at the end of a sequence. VMI, when they looked at their 30-year-old gen ed program, sound familiar? They decided to add a reflective portfolio, e-portfolio element. Students had to say, how have I learned this stuff across all of my gen ed classes? Hint, hint, I would love to do that here. I think that'd be really, really smart. Whether that's part of a senior seminar, whether that's part of traditional gen, I don't know how. I have a friend I'm co-writing a textbook on audio rhetoric with, and she is a huge fan of asking her students to make audio process notes, to think through what they're working on and the problems they're trying to solve out loud, to just pull out your phone and be like, okay, let me think this through. She has a lot of great recordings of herself doing that. Of course, certain learning styles probably works better for them to talk rather than to write. But for her, it's really powerful. There's another great article here that kind of goes into more depths, more of the research on what is it about audio, about speaking, that it makes that really useful for some people. If we're moving beyond writing, one of the chapters in that collection, she talks about students just having them regularly get in the habit of turning on their webcam, recording a short, all right, here's a log of what I did recently. Here's where I wrote. Here's how I wrote. Here's the time that I wrote. Here's the software that I used. Here's who was around. Here's how loud it was. Here's what time of day it was. Here's if I had coffee or not. Like, all of those things are part of your reflectiveness, right? And all of those things can help you, if you're trying to learn how to write better, can help you reflect on, oh, wow, that worked for me. I tell students all the time how it was my sophomore year of college. Up to then, I thought I was a night person. And then my sophomore year, things are getting hard, and all my friends are staying up all night. They're pulling all these all-nighters, and I would get to like 1:30, and I'd be like, I'm done. And I'd go to bed, and I'd get up at 5:30, and I'd make a pot of coffee in my own room, and all of a sudden, the ideas would just flow. And that's when I realized, if I write with no distractions, with nothing else open, before I do anything else with coffee, I can write. Any other time, I'm crossing my fingers. That's still true today, and that's something I had to reflect on to learn, or I had to do it. Other kind of visual ways to do reflection, maybe by drawing it out in some way, storyboarding that maybe. This is kind of what Deb was talking about. This article talks about having students have conversations about the writing in the comments, not just a peer review where someone adds a comment and walks away, but a peer review where someone comments or maybe writes a letter to the original author. And then the original author has to respond, has to reflect on it and say, let me tell you what I think about what you said. Maybe that conversation continues, maybe, but a place where they're forced to reflect. This is kind of not parallel to the rest of the list, but I did find a document specifically about ideas about ways to use journals and other kinds of reflection and service learning. I haven't done CBL for a while outside of first year SEM, but I remember when I was going to more of those meetings a few years ago, there was always that emphasis on, don't just have your students do stuff, have them do it and then reflect on it. Don't just send your students out to an internship, have them do the internship and then reflect on what they're learning. Have them name to themselves so it'll stick, so it'll transfer. I found a recenter article that was talking about rhetorical reflections. This idea is pretty similar to what we said, but what I liked about it is it was kind of reflection before they do it. They get the assignment and they kind of have to do a pre-writing where they're like, all right, let me put into mind, let me kind of restate what I think the professor is asking me to do and how I'm starting to think that I want to solve this problem. Kind of an early reflection to kind of help get them on the right track, to kind of use as a jumping off point for what they're going to do later. Let me add one thing that I remembered as someone else was speaking. I've started asking students to write emails to their future selves. I don't remember the name of the site that I've used. There's a few of them. If you Google email your future self, there are sites where you can type it in and you say, hey, future self, it's the first week of first year seminar. This is how I'm feeling. This is what I think about. This is what I think I'm going to learn. And you can give them some prompts to kind of make it more reflective-y and make them show up, right before the last week of class. And then in class, you could say, hey, did you get your emails? What did you think about that? I've also done it where I've asked students at the end of Ret 101 to write themselves an email that comes at the end of Ret 102 to kind of remind them, hey, go back and look at your online portfolio from what you did in 101. See now that you've done a whole nother class in this, how do you feel about where you were at then? Ways to build that in. And finally, I think this is my last one that I have. And of course, we could do this all day. It's a little more detailed, but I love it because it's the pre-post things that so many of you were talking about. It's a technical writing course. So the very first day of class, they say, essentially do a technical writing exercise. Pick something about your major field or on a technical topic and write to someone who doesn't know that topic. Explain it, essentially do a explaining something. They do it on literally the first day of class. The teacher collects it. And then towards the end, they say, there's some assignments where students have to go back and read all the work they've done, have to start seeing if there's any growth trends in what they've done. And they also give them this rubric. I think it's the rubric that the professor actually uses. I don't remember that or not, but a rubric about how to judge if technical writing meets the needs of the audience or not. And then the students, in this class, they get extra credit for it as a way to kind of make it feel less like busy work. But they say, all right, if you want extra credit, here you go. Go back to that thing you wrote on the first day and apply that rubric to this and do some reflective writing about how you would do that better now. So I think there's a lot of creative ways we could kind of apply this to our own schedules, to our own classes, right? And with that, that's actually all I have. That's all that's in this document here. Obviously, you can click all the links. A couple really quick closing reminders. There is a teaching writing portal page. If you can get to it straight off there. It's on the faculty resources page of the portal. That's where you can find that writing intensive course proposal form, but that's also where I'm going to put a link to this video and a link to this document that you can see. I am, as always, open to having one-on-one conversations. Kristen and I once tag teamed a chat with Joel Lynch in psychology. We talked for probably almost an hour. A lot of it was about reflection, how to help him get with the things that he wanted to get out of his classes. I did use a professional development grant to order 15 copies of this book, Engaging Ideas, which is a book primarily about the connection between writing and critical thinking, but it's got a lot of very specific ideas too, including how to write various kinds of writing prompts and how to grade it. I always use a chapter from that, and when I'm training the writing center consultants, I'm like, how do you respond to like really awful writing? Well, let's use this John Bean idea to start that conversation. Anyone who's here, or really even if you're not here, I've got a box of like 12 of them back here. I'm happy to give you one if you want. No big deal. And of course, you can get back to this doc whenever you want. So it's 12:48. In these last 2 minutes, is there anything that you're like, wait, this has been on my mind. We really need to talk about X or Y. I'll send you one, Jen. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Especially the how to speak with folks about really bad writing.
Right.
Yeah, I just keep trying different things, and I'll take any advice I can get. Even
That's next year.
I've been having that conversation for 20 years, but any help is still appreciated.
I always talk this big positive talk in these things. I'm like, yes, let's talk about it. And then I see the really bad writing too, and I'm like, I get it. Anything else on your mind?
Oh,
sorry, Marilyn, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I had just remembered I was putting together a thing for all the RET instructors that was like all of the reflective writing activities, and I only got so far before I was like, I gotta plan my class and not do this. But I don't think that document is up on the teaching writing page. I think it's something that was shared with RET 101 and RET 102 instructors.
I was actually looking for this when I was prepping this. I was like, I think Kristen has a thing, and I forgot to ask you. So
yeah, I mean, it's not designed very well, honestly. I meant to go back to it, but there is a list of activities there that folks might find helpful as like a copy and then edit and make it your own kind of thing.
Yeah. Can I share this link and my link, and I'll put it on the teaching writing page too, or is it more private than that? Okay.
And then I was going to share, this other thing wasn't up there, but if anyone's interested in exploring journal, like logs, like daily journaling logs, where students kind of track their time, what they've eaten, what their energy level is. And then I've had students do week-long documenting of that and then write a reflection at the end of the unit. So if anyone's looking for an example of that, that second thing I just pasted is one I used in my 102 class, just for, not that you didn't already give a lot of really wonderful information,
no, please.
But just some extra how-tos, extra encouragement for reflection, which I really appreciate in my classes.
No, I appreciate it. I'll stick that in there too, just so it's there as I'm kind of rudely doing as you speak. So thanks. Marlene, what were you going to say? Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
What I was thinking of was just what you mentioned about VMI and that, incorporating reflection into the general education curriculum makes me think of like, some schools have exit interviews, where students have to think, before they graduate, formal process of kind of closing their college education, where they think about everything, gen ed and their majors and all that stuff. And it's probably something to keep on our, on our plates, I guess, with whatever happens with gen ed in the future, we're still just shaping it, right? And I think that the fact that it's in the writing intensive graduation requirement that we're working on is also great. So thank you.
Yeah.
That's valuable stuff.
It's just one little part of it, but an important part. Yeah. Well, I think I need to formally let you go. I'm in a 1 o'clock meeting with 2 of you. But thank you so much for being here. This is always a lot of fun.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kyle.